Hello, good morning and welcome everybody to today's webinar on recruiting, retaining and managing digital volunteers. My name is Carmen Talbot and I'm the project manager for Heritage Digital, and I am delighted to welcome you to the webinar as part of our National Lottery Heritage funded Heritage Digital programme. Now, before I introduce you to today's speaker, Claire Sully, there's a bit of introduction and background from me about the project itself. Heritage Digital is a consortium project of 4 partners fusing heritage and digital skill experience. Together, we create free, high-quality digital skills training, events and resources for the UK heritage sector. And we have themes of communications, marketing strategy, technology and digital rights. And we make sure everything we make is open to trustees, staff, volunteers and freelancers working in and associated with heritage organisations. Up next, after this webinar, we have our 3rd virtual day event on the 14th of July, and that is on the topic of digital storytelling. This again will be free and the booking site has just launched yesterday afternoon, so do check out the Heritage Digital website after this webinar. Now, another thing from our consortium is that we've recently won further funding from the National Lottery Heritage Fund and DCMS to create more resources answering your digital questions, and also small group focus training to support business resilience and success. Now, to note that we are about to have a period of consultation for both of these programmes, so keep your eyes on the Heritage Digital mailing list for opportunities to take part and help us shape this and tell us what you need. So, a tiny bit about who the Heritage Digital Consortium are. It's led by the Heritage Alliance, who employ me, and we are a charity. We promote the role of the independent heritage sector. We're a membership body and we have over 150 heritage organisations as members. If you're interested in joining or supporting our work, please do get in touch. The main work of the Alliance is to influence the government on behalf of the independent heritage movement and facilitate connections between organisations, both within and outside of the sector. And as part of this, we also run capacity and support projects like Heritage Digital and also our COVID-19 response programme, Rebuilding Heritage. Now, our project partners are the Media Trust, and they are our digital communications and marketing specialist partner. They're designers of our beautiful downloadable guides and templates, which you may have seen already, and they are linked to leading organisations in the world of digital through their corporate partners. Naomi Corn Associates, who you've probably all heard of already, they're our digital rights specialist partner, and they deliver content on rights management, data protection, and how the heritage sector needs to consider these necessities in the increasingly digital world. Finally, today, our webinar leads are our digital technology specialist partner, Charity Digital. Now, they're hosts of the project website and mailing list, they're event managers of our webinars and our virtual events like these, and it's their expertise that makes everything run so smoothly. Now, just before I ask Claire to join me, there are a few housekeeping points. The presentation element today will be around 45 minutes long, and we've then allowed for around 15 minutes of audience questions to take the finish time to 11 AM. If you have a question for Claire, please type it into the box marked Q&A at the bottom of your screen. There's also a chat box, which some of you are using already. Please feel free to introduce yourself to others, flag any technical issues, let us know where you're coming from today. I'm sitting in a very hot room, mistakenly wore a full-length shirt in Totnes, so may open a window in a second once I've stopped speaking. Now, the recording of this session and the presentation slides will be made publicly available after the event, and they'll be emailed directly to everyone on the mailing list and posted on the Heritage Digital portal. It does take us a couple of weeks to do this because we caption it and edit it to make sure any, any slip-ups are edited out. So we aim for around 2 weeks on that. And we normally have captions, AI captions. We're having a couple of issues in the background with that. So if you do go to try and turn them on, they may not be working yet, but we'll update in the chat as soon as we know whether or not they're going to work for the webinar. So apologies on that for captions users. Finally, the eternal question of feedback. We hope you enjoyed this webinar. You will receive an email about giving feedback at the end of the session. So please fill it in. It's really helpful for our evaluation. Right, now I'm going to invite Claire onto the screen, finally, the moment you're waiting for. Claire, hello. Hi.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi.
Where
Hi.
are you today and how hot is it?
I'm in Bournemouth. I'm actually on a sort of a 24-hour holiday seeing a friend, and it was here or the beach, so I'm here with you now. And it will be the beach in a moment, but I'm from Somerset. My office is based in Bristol, but I work across the UK.
Oh, lovely. Well, thank you for choosing us over the beach today.
Thank you.
I'm going to let Claire introduce herself properly, but to very briefly say that she's the managing director of Tickbox Marketing and kind of crucially for this webinar, the program director for community makers and volunteer makers. So I know there's a lot to get through and we've got a limited amount of time, so I will leave you to it and leave the screen, but I will come back at the end for the Q&A. So just a reminder for anyone who's just popped in, pop your questions for Claire in the Q&A box at any time in the presentation, and we'll get to them at the end.
Thank you. Oh, I will just get the slides working. Right, so here we go. Great, okay. Right, so for 15 years I've been developing technology and around with the idea of growing communities and engaging and inspiring volunteering. And for 7 years, I've been working specifically with heritage organisations, charities and communities, groups. And for many of those years, we've been talking about change. Been working up and down the country, worked on a national programme for the Arts Council England and regional programmes for networks of museums. I think if we're looking for answers, understanding the question is the starting point. So we're looking at, I'm looking at these words: recruiting, retaining and managing digital volunteers. Those words are often connected with volunteer programs, and they're interesting for me because they also sound familiar with employing people as well. So what do we mean by recruiting, retaining and managing digital volunteers? Digital volunteers, are they any different to volunteers non-digital? So let's look at the landscape and look at who are we talking about? We're talking about people, about 20 million people are volunteering in the UK, and this is stats from 2019. And there's a value to that volunteering because, of course, people's time have a value, and it's around about 22 billion. And if you add on the well-being factor, it could even be more than that. And most people have volunteered in their lives, and the typical volunteer is most likely 65 plus and least likely 25 to 34, so younger age groups. Time is an issue for all volunteers, and what we need to consider with volunteering programs is that people want different things from volunteering because they have different reasons, different expectations, and this is connected to life stages. For example, younger people looking for experience to help their CVs. And maybe if you've got a young family and you're at primary school, you get involved with school activities. So most people do get a positive experience from volunteering. This is why so many of us do it. Health benefits, for instance. But there is frequent questions around the value, our value, how we're feeling valued as volunteer. And diversity is a real issue for volunteering, and people and groups of people, say for example lower socioeconomic groups or the BA ME community, often can feel excluded from opportunities. So diversity is really key in our changing volunteering landscape. But I think when you think about volunteering, I think about you, think about me, think about our experiences when we get involved in things and how we fit it into our lives. And are we able to commit every Wednesday 2 to 5 o'clock somewhere? So how do we? So I think a good starting point is to think about our experiences, and I bet many of you there looking at me now, it's volunteering has been key to your development, personal and professional. So I think I'm here to talk about recruiting, retaining, and managing, and I wonder whether the conversation, in light of the challenges and the changing volunteer landscape, should be maybe about connecting, inspiring, and doing, and looking at community as a way of finding the answers to recruiting, retaining, and managing volunteers and digital volunteers. So why digital? Why are we talking about digital in volunteering? It's quite simple, really. Digital platforms, websites, social media can bring people together. People connect around interests and beliefs and feel that they can belong somewhere virtually. And the reach is incredible through platforms, which is scalable. So you can reach large numbers of people. You don't have, simply with messages on websites and interactivity on social media and platforms. And it's very important to understand that with digital, you can send out different messages and target different audiences in the same place. And digital is cost effective, and you can measure your impact. And I've been working with technology in this context for, as I say, a number of years, 15 years. And I was going to give you some examples about the platforms that I work with, but these platforms can be, do apply, my examples and the principles do apply broadly across all technology. So I'm going to talk about community makers and volunteer makers, and how we've been using the technology to drive the principles that drive all programs for volunteering and for digital volunteering, and then look at the digital element of that, so you can see and hopefully get some ideas and hopefully feel inspired about what you can do with your organizations. The principles are probably going to be very familiar to you. The Creating Capacity report, the HVG Heritage Volunteer Group have recently done, talk a lot about how important the leadership is in the culture of an organization that focuses and values volunteering to create the sustainability that volunteer and heritage organizations need through a vision. So a real key principle is that leadership get behind any strategies and any communication for your volunteering, and digital is a part of that communication and how you deliver it and how you reach your target audiences. Diversity and creativity are absolutely at the heart of this, and it's at the heart of this idea with community makers and volunteer makers. So I'm going to show you a couple of examples where these principles that drive all volunteer programs also drive digital programs as well. So this is an example of a group of heritage organisations coming together in Gloucester and working in Gloucester and beyond. And they created together, as there were a number of organisations, a larger pool of volunteering. And they're through matching activities, actions and challenges with people's skills and interests. So when people sign up, tick some boxes and say, this is what I'm interested in, these are my causes and passions, and and what I'm interested in doing, and then the activities and actions and challenges that are available on this digital platform then automatically get sent to individuals, bring them in, and once they come in, they will then see more challenges that would draw them in to get involved. And talked about time and fitting in with people and targeting different groups of people at the same time. Well, digital can neatly do that through categories. And as you see, there are categories here that are just a minute, hour or two, give a day, and regular help. And if you build up a bigger group of numbers of people, you'll find that that core that can give more time will become available. So I was going to show you an example of one category that Engage in Gloucester has called corporate volunteering, but it's creative and it's fun, and there's a challenge that says play spreadsheets for play, which is simply looking for somebody who will give them some accounting advice to get involved, to draw them in, to inspire them for this organisation. And I think it's important with digital that you make it fun, you make it interesting. And of course, if someone had signed up into this platform and ticked the boxes that that's their area of interest, and this particular challenge would be targeted to them. Okay, so, and if you notice with this platform, it is the community that's reflected. Behind this is the council and lots of heritage organisations, as I mentioned, but it's about showing a dynamic community doing things and getting involved and showing the participation. Why? Because this will inspire other people. And of course, because it's digital, it can easily be shared on other social media platforms, which reaches a wider audience. And it's really letting the community do things to drive the volunteering. So it's not just talking about the management of volunteering, which a lot of technology with volunteer management is about managing. This is actually showing the community and inspiring people. The idea that with community makers and volunteer makers did start in Luton with Wardown House Museum and Gallery, that was looking to bring people together to really help sustain the museum. And what they did is they created this sense of belonging and being a museum maker and getting things done together. And they grew their numbers into the thousands, which drew in investment and created people not just volunteering, but supporting the museum in all the ways that they're hoping. And if we have a look at some examples of what they're doing, I quite like this example of the category of volunteering, digital volunteering, which is do it at home, fun at home. And lots of little things while you can you could do a blog post, or you can do some crocheting. You can just tag us in, because of course, if you're doing things like tag us in, you're telling people about the museum and you're promoting the museum, and it's a very quick thing to do for those who are time poor. And design your own mini museum. So it's very, very, very creative. The technology, as I said, digital technology can show you impact. And what we can see in the admin area of these challenges, there are lots of challenges that people can do at home. Digital does allow you to participate from home, which widens the access for people to get involved and participate. But you can see the numbers: 97 people crochet lace trees, but you can see lots of other numbers, and they soon add up to show the participation. Valuing volunteering is really important. So when we look at an admin area, showing how many challenges, how many events, how many are in the community, and the value of that, and the value over the period of time, of the lifetime of using the platform. So what Engage in Gloucester achieved together with their community and inspiring their communities, they changed the face of volunteering, and that was the words used by the Director of Culture at Gloucester Council. And they saw that their young people made up 40% of the volunteering community. So it was a kind of different kind of landscape. And they, younger people wanting to put experience on their UCA forms or doing Duke of Edinburgh awards, and micro volunteering, which is the lots of bits of volunteering, blended with the more regular volunteering, meant that all age groups do get involved. And we do often see with digital engagement and those audiences that it's all age ranges that do get involved with the engagement and participation. So, principles and in practice. What's this? How am I going to sum this up? Really, if you notice with those platforms, as I say, it's not just about the technology that's managing the digital volunteers. It's actually showing a dynamic community in action. Let me just check I've got you in share. I don't think I have. Here we go. Right. Sorry. Here we go. Okay, I think this is why we'll be editing. Thank you for your patience. Right, yeah, so hopefully you can see that. Okay, so think about it as it's our community, it's your community, our community. Show the community in action. So you can do this in Facebook groups, you can do this where you can show something dynamic happening. On those platforms that I showed you quickly, you can see people popping up when they've given permission, saying what they have been, what they've done, and thinking about the activity in an inspiring way as it's a challenge. It's an activity, it's an action. Showing the actions of people is really important. My experience of working with many organizations, it won't happen unless you plan and you think about your strategy, and let the community drive itself. Let them feel that they're part of it, and they maybe they can suggest challenges and where they can get involved, and let them you obviously with digital you're fully in control. It's only what you put up and how many people you want to be involved with. That's technology will let you do that. Always reflect the diverse audience in order to attract a wider audience. Digital allows participation from remote and at home, and that again will allow a diverse audience, thinking of different younger people and what their needs are, what their life stage is, and making sure what opportunities are open to them are available. And of course, leadership and ownership, and getting buy-in from the organisation. We're all involved in engagement, right? Sometimes volunteering is seen in a little box, in a little area, and then a volunteer coordinator or manager is at the coalface having to sort it all out. So volunteering is changing. So think about, are you changing your volunteering? And how are you changing your volunteering to adapt to a diverse audience? So plan, inspire, to engage, and use digital to be at the heart of that, and let the communities drive the actions and activity, their volunteering, and through their participation. And think of your volunteers as your community, as your audience. So I'm a little bit ahead, 5 minutes ahead of my time. Carmen, I don't know if you want to jump back in and ask and facilitate some questions.
Hello, hi. You caught me on a sip of coffee there, so
sorry, it's unusual, isn't it? People are running ahead. Sorry about that.
Well, we've got some, I can see some questions in the Q&A, I can see some in the chat. Like, I've got a few things that I'd love to speak to you about.
Okay.
So let's just, I'll take the audience questions first, be fair. So Sally says, how does it work out the value of volunteering? And this is kind of covered in two questions, so I'll put them together. I don't know. So there's how does it work, the value of volunteering? And there's one from Sean saying, you mentioned value repeatedly. How is that calculated?
Okay, so in economic terms, 3 levels: a higher, a lower, and a middle. And often, well, the organisations have that figure themselves, and there are, you know, sector-wide sort of value costs, but it's based on people's time, and it's based on an hourly rate, and all challenges, opportunities, actions, activities are based on a time period. Some obviously is when people come back and they do volunteering regularly, they put their own time in, because when they go into the technology, and digital technology can do this, you know, allows you to personalize the experience, so you can put in repeated time. But value is really important. It's also the value, people feeling valued and feeling like they've got a thank you. And technology, just with simple things like autoresponders, can really convey the voice of the organisation and say thank you. I know many heritage organisations appreciate and know how fundamental their volunteering communities are, but often when you're really busy and you're dealing with multiples of people, that simple thank you can be missed.
So let's go then to Siobhan says, would you recommend a particular platform?
Well, of course, I'd recommend volunteer makers and community makers. I also really like Facebook groups as well. I use a Facebook group for my village called What's Going On Croscombe, and we've got about 500 people in a group with just the village. And from that, all these activities, actions have come out, and people feel empowered to step up and drive ideas. I'm talking about the side of digital where it's about the engagement, participation, seeing it. There's a lot of volunteer management stuff out there, which the audience will be familiar with. And their databases and their tools are great tools. But what we're doing with volunteer makers and community makers, I don't see that much of many examples of it being, it's like a platform that is a community website, but the tools are all there, and it encourages you to drive your strategy. But Facebook groups, as long, again, if they apply the principles of what is the culture of that group, you know, and who's in my Facebook group, What's Going On Croscombe, I've got 10 different admins, different age groups, different backgrounds, different skills running it. So the same things apply, but I'm a fan of Facebook groups.
Is it sort of, I guess there are sort of two options. There's a CRM kind of either bespoke or off-the-shelf platform approach for engaging and managing volunteers, or there's something like a Facebook group or a community group, but you maybe have to plug in other tools if you want to sort of, I'm trying to think of words that don't sound too like the sort of employed workplace, and say sort of track timesheets and things like that, because I know, well, I mean, that's sort of what it is, but I know that what you were saying at the top was don't treat volunteers linguistically the same as employees. But where I'm getting to with that is if you're using a Facebook group, you maybe have to use sort of Google Sheets or a form to put in there so people can sort of submit their own kind of timings. Yeah, that's right, because the question of feeling valued is really important, and 1 in 3 people you know, say that work gets in the way of their volunteering, and I think that if you are presenting your volunteering opportunity as if it's a job, you know, it could put people off getting involved, and they wouldn't necessarily feel valued. My plug's just come out. I'm just going to plug it in because I don't want to disappear. I wondered if it was maybe a cat situation or a
there we go. Is that going to come back on? Yes. Yeah. So yeah, that's yeah, I don't think I think that if you present it in a I'm recruiting for someone, you're looking for someone for free to do a job that somebody could have been doing. And I know people within organizations are often very uncomfortable with that. With micro volunteering and digital volunteering, people are doing bits and they're doing lots of bits, but they're not an employee.
I think also it's fair to say there's a lot of great advocacy in the sector kind of pushing back, because it's obviously illegal to advertise something that's a volunteering role in a way that makes it sound like or if it is effectively a job. So sort of fair museum jobs have a lot out there on this and a lot of resources to help you write role descriptions in a way that that is fair. So I'll just, a quick one that follows on to that is what tech drives this platform? So I think this relates to when you were showing us the examples earlier. What tech drives this platform? Was it
so it's volunteer makers technology, and the platform is community makers, and there's also a version that we're developing to help people learn skills called A Way to Work, and that's being developed at the moment. So it's volunteer makers is the technology, with a challenge database that matches people's skills and interests with opportunities, actions, and challenges. And you know, it's usually a question is always around why call it challenges. But if you think about the way we get inspired by challenges, by Park Run or gamification. So how many challenges can we do? And sharing and telling people about our achievement. We're driven by the idea of doing something that challenges us.
I was just thinking, you hit the nail on the head. In fact, like my own way of engaging yourself, certainly across the lockdown, is that I downloaded, I cannot remember what it's called now, but a walking/running app where you track the amount you walk, and it tells you how far you've walked along Hadrian's Wall. And then it gives you little rewards for walking X amount of the way. And also in my own community, in a kind of climate emergency group, we're challenged to put a bird box up or plant a wildflower patch, and you get kind of kudos for it. So yeah.
Do you think of that as volunteering? You see what I mean? You're participating, but you're a volunteer, but you don't think of yourself as a traditional volunteer. And that is what we're capturing with this technology and with this idea, and why it's beyond volunteer management.
So I'm going to ask you a question here relating to volunteer makers itself, because it feels relevant, from Becky, saying, are there volunteer management tools on volunteer makers? For example, timetabling on-site volunteers. Yeah,
there's a Rota Lite, which we as I mentioned, we developed this idea with a heritage organisation, starting with the Culture Trust in Luton, a museum makers, and we started off being quite stubborn about it's about the engagement side of it, and it's about driving strategies and bringing organisations together. And what it has always done is change the mindset of organisations. Even if they haven't used it that much, they've thought differently about their strategies and their planning and the way they work together. And but we do have tools on there, a Rota Lite, and the way that you can put time in for your volunteers as well. You can print out reports, you can look at the impact of the demographics and what skills people have got and all those things. And it's something we increase as we talk to different organisations about how they use it. One example, recent example, is called Let's Do It Wells, which is, I don't know if you know Wales, the smallest city in England. The organisation's led by a bigger heritage organisation called Bishop's Palace, working with the Wales Coronavirus Network and a whole host of about 40 different organisations. And they really embraced this idea of volunteer makers and community makers. And they called it Let's Do It Wells. And they rarely use the word volunteering, but on there is obviously volunteering opportunities, as well as things like grow veg, but for a food bank, grow veg in your garden or your allotment, but do some extra food for a food bank, as well as, you know, be a guide at the heritage, you know, at the Bishop's Palace. So, you know, side by side. Another good one was the 10-book challenge. So during lockdown, they had a lot of lockdown, you know, living, you know, well-being challenges. And the 10-book challenge was the local cathedral music school, a curator, for a librarian, curating a number of book topics. And you simply said, I want to do this challenge, and on the autoresponder you downloaded the curated book list. So you know, digital technology, as I mentioned, is scalable. You can do things like that. You can have a challenge bank of things that you don't really have to manage, but you can see people can nicely do and share and be involved and feel like they're part of something you're offering them.
Lovely. So there's sort of an element of like the community taking things forward in their own way, or that kind of using it to their own purposes. So there's a question here about sharing stories. So from Catherine, can you recommend any platforms where volunteers can share their own stories and perspectives to build community alongside an organisation managing it and measuring it in terms of volunteer hours that isn't social media?
Blogs, WordPress blogs, and also if you put on your websites asking people to share their stories, you can put them on your websites as well. Yeah, I think have a blog, you know, like a WordPress blog, which you can integrate into your website quite easily. With probably a developer would need to help you on that. But yeah, sharing your stories, and also obviously you've got the physical space as well, and sharing stories through photos and as well. And I mean, social media is a micro blog. It's the same thing, it's just smaller. But yeah, my first thought on that would be if have a blog, a blogging platform like a WordPress platform, could be very easy to use.
I suppose the great thing, I think a workplace I worked for about 5 years ago did a similar thing with a WordPress sort of website / blog element, and the great thing we found about that, and it was WordPress, but there are other blog sites available, is that you can create lots of different levels of permissions, can't you? So lots of people, yes. Lots of people can post comments on the blog anyway without having any level of permissions to get into the site, but there's an administrator and editor, so some people could write, but they wouldn't have to worry about accidentally deleting somebody else's thing or the whole website, and that was really reassuring. The other thing I'll say on that point, in terms of the Heritage Digital Project, we have certain resources like a social media policy template, and Naomi Corner's recently created a volunteers and copyright guide for us. So if you want to sort of check out what you need to know in terms of where volunteers stand with work they produce, and what you need to know, I would recommend having a look at those too. Yeah.
Well, often people do think, oh, we've got to keep them on our website. You know, if they don't go on our website, if they're off our website, we've lost them. But actually, think about as you were saying, Carmen, you know, you can have a separate blogging platform. And we call them microsites. And the good thing about microsites, many of our clients have them. So there's a Horses for Health, which is Together with Horses. They are doing a national relay to promote the well-being benefits of your being with your horse, and particularly during lockdown. And they've, you know, the charities behind that and the community voluntary organisations behind that all have websites. But when you have a microsite, what you're doing is you're focusing your audience on something very specific and dynamic that people can get involved in. Your website has to deal with a lot of different things, but it doesn't lose your audience to send them somewhere else if you're sending them down a user journey where they're going to get involved and participate, and then do a transaction. And the transaction can be come along to the museum, or volunteer, or buy tickets, or tell the world about you, or with the Horses for Health do the relay across the country. They ended up getting 10,000 people into a Facebook group first, and then with us we built the Horses for Health, or together with Horses microsite, where people can sign up. It's actually a community makers website. The difference being, when people sign up to do the relay and other challenges, they actually pay to do the relay, and they £15, and in return they get all these goodies. So they get like a tabard and all this stuff, and it goes to charity. The money is helping the cause, and they identify, clearly state where the money is going. So yeah, don't be think about a microsite being your volunteer community, being on a microsite, maybe a blogging platform, doing stuff, talking something, driving ideas. It actually is easier to manage than people might think.
So there's a question here with lots of upvotes from Katie, and they say, is it possible to create a digital community that simultaneously involves non-digital participants? A number of our volunteers are hesitant to participate online or with technology.
Yeah, yes, I think you've got to remember, it's not about the technology, it's about the community, and it's about people, and it's about relationships. And what I've been talking about today and demonstrating is how to keep that conversation and those relationships maintained. Ultimately, it's about all people. In some respects, allowing remote participation does create a wider access, because some people are at home and unable to physically come into your museums and your heritage organisations. But I do think ultimately, with the experience that you are creating for people, it will lead to a real world experience. And I think that's, if you have a scalable strategy, then you can focus on those people that are really valuable to you, and often in your core volunteering teams. So I think you can, and especially intergenerational as well. So you get younger people maybe doing digital recordings of memories from people with their experiences that maybe are in a different generation, and then letting them see that. But I do think with COVID and the restrictions, it has shown that the generations that are using technology are wider than ever. And I won't tell you my age, but the generation above me is considered an older generation. I guess I'm very close to that. But that generation created the internet, so I think sometimes we might think of, I'm sure there's people in the audience who can say, well, actually, my mum, or my mum in her 80s and my dad in the 90s, they're using Facebook to FaceTime, so I do think, I hope that answers the question. I think it's a mixed answer, but yeah, remember, it's about real connections.
Do you think, like, part of it as well, or I'm just trying to draw on my brief experience of being in a volunteer management position, one of the kind of realizations for me was understanding people's preferred methods of communication, and some people actually wanted to receive things by letter, and some people would always want emails to be sent to them, but would never answer them. And some people would want to be telephoned and would always telephone me, despite my preferred method of communication being email. So there was sort of a period of adjustment, of understanding knowing that everybody needed to get the same information, but understanding that it needed to come in different ways. And I'm sure with kind of digital management systems or CRM, you can also note that and know that you keep the community together and you keep informing people, but
using platforms like MailChimp can help you, and Google Analytics. So doing some Google Analytics analysis on different charity websites that I've been doing recently, And really striking how younger groups of people are increasing their engagement in these examples that I with these charity websites that I was looking at. And they're very cause driven, this generation. So, and it's their cause that you are connecting with, not them coming to you for your cause to take on your cause. So it's worth looking at your Google stats if you're not already, and comparing them, particularly comparing them 2020 and 2019 for now, and just seeing that change. And I've noticed, as I say, that the younger people have been, are appearing. And the stats at the start of my presentation showed you that the traditional volunteer was a lot older and younger people were less. But I think, as I say, it's more spread across the board. So not one size fits all approach is not really the answer.
So there's a question that links to that there, and I'm just going to say it out loud in case it prompts any other thoughts for you. But Patricia says, you mentioned that many volunteers tend to be over 65 plus years old. How can you be sure you capture those who are not as digitally aware as others on these platforms?
Yeah, so, well, as I say, that generation actually created the internet, and are very, and they're an interesting generation because they are busy often. I mean, this is sort of pre-COVID. They're often welcomed into the workplace because of their valuable skills and experience, and often could be traveling, and so often your engagement with that group really has to be about understanding what their expectations are, what their interests are. And does that sound familiar? It was what I was talking about anyway. But generally, I don't see that age group has a barrier to using technology. Now, I know could be exceptions to that, but that, as I say, that's one generation just above me, and some people have said it about my generation, you're not using technology, and I'm kind of like, yes we are. But I do think that you will have some people within your volunteer community that may find technology a barrier, but you know how to deal with people like that and welcome those people. And ultimately, with all people, whether they're digital or not, it's about the relationships and the real world connections that you can create.
Yeah, I would completely agree with that, actually. I was just thinking that it doesn't feel to me all of the time. Obviously there's an accessibility and there's a digital exclusion element perhaps that tends towards the more older generations. But for myself personally and people my own age, we're so online in our work and in our kind of personal relationships that actually we might sort of skew away from a digital volunteering opportunity because we just feel kind of burnt out by the amount of tech. And I know I have to put my hands up and say that I have not done any virtual tours during lockdown. I personally am not interested in kind of walking around a virtual version of something, and I kind of shy away from it. And I say that as somebody fascinated by digital tech and skills. So it's not necessarily sort of because someone is over 65 that they might not want to engage with.
Yeah, I think you're touching on a really important point. I think what's interesting is the participation itself, the creativity itself, not the digital. The digital is the enabler to bring people together, to communicate that. Don't think of everything having to be then technology. So it could be paint a picture or design your own museum. And the technology is how you scan it, or you email it, or you take a photo of it, or you simply print it, or you take the piece of paper with the paint on it, walk into the museum. So so the creativity, the most interesting thing about what I do is what people do with the platform that facilitates it. But I'm also curious to know that we're talking about barriers, and we're talking about potentially to older people who might find they're digitally excluded. But is anyone asking about this lower socioeconomic groups that I mentioned? That feel that the data and reports the NCFEO has talked about, feel excluded and don't feel that heritage organisations are open to them, and communities, the BAME communities. So I think that, you know, I'd love to know how heritage organisations, or what their ideas are around, you know, enabling a wider accessibility, not just the technology, but the audience. So that, I don't know if anyone's got any comments on that, but I'd love to know that. But obviously that's something that is really important to the sustainability of heritage organisations, to have a wider, diverse audience.
So there's still lots more questions. I'm going to take, just see if we can take 3 or 4 before the end of the session, but there's one here that I've been meaning to come back to, from Helen, who says, do you have any top tips for retaining volunteers in between projects?
Yeah, so if you have a bank of challenges, or, you know, that either on your blogging platform or in your Facebook community group, in your website, and they are just there for people to do. And with things like autoresponders, like the 10-book challenge that I talked about, you know, they're just there, or you know, tag us in, like you saw with museum makers. So the micro challenges are a really good thing to keep people in between and to keep growing, because people have more time. People have more time to do little bits, little chunks of activity. Suffolk Archives has got some great examples of micro challenges in between. At the same time, they had a big capital build and they needed to bring volunteers to sustain and help them run the new building. That micro volunteering, digital and remote participation is a good way to grow those numbers, engage, retain, while then you get your projects and you launch your projects and target specific or possibly operational volunteers.
And do you think, just to ask my own question on the back of that, I was thinking, and I know you mentioned kind of reward in your presentation. Do you think those sort of micro challenges and the feeling of kind of accomplishment around that can help to emulate the element of reward that comes from the interpersonal relationship of in-person volunteering, and also, yeah, again, from my brief time managing volunteers, the sort of the things you bring in, or the details you share about your life, that create this sense of reward both ways, because you're asking them, how's your dog today, or like, here's a picture of my sister.
Well, yeah, often the reward can be, it's sort of multifaceted. So I learnt banjo in lockdown. My dog always leaves the room, but I play once a week in a dementia home, and the reward for me is the reaction and the connection through the music. And I'm developing as a musician, and they make me feel so good because they really react as any audience reacts to if you're performing, and hopefully well. But it was really interesting that the boss of that particular place never spoken to me and just stared at me and never thanked me. So I do feel rewarded from the experience itself, but the management and the leadership has not. And the danger of that, of course, is I might end up going, I might go somewhere else, but that won't happen. But reward is also, if you see somebody doing lots of stuff for you, lots of hours, lots of challenges, lots of activities, you can recognize that, bringing them in for a cup of tea. You know, with digital technology, as I say, it can say the thank you for you in an authentic way in your voice, because you can control that. You can say what you want to say. You can target that message with digital technology. But yeah, I think there can be things like, you know, 2 tickets for one, or come in for a cup of tea, or as your organisations already do, you know, specific days for your community of volunteers. I prefer to call them a community than volunteers, because of the experience I just told you about being a volunteer. There's other musicians that go in that get paid, and they're sort of treated different to me as a volunteer. I feel I'm probably not valued. I am from the people that brought me in, the activity coordinator. She's my sister. She really values me, and her smile, but it shows me the value. But I think I remember going to an organisation and it said, visitors this way and volunteers that way. You know, and it was kind of like, you know, and I have a bit, I think people, the perception of what a volunteer is, they can be a bit strict of who they are. And often your volunteers have a lot of skills, a lot of experience. I advise on volunteer programs. That's why I'm talking today. And that this particular organisation, the boss doesn't even speak to me. And I find it quite interesting. Of course, it's a bit naughty because I mention it here. Yeah, I'm not going to name the place, but I do feel a bit bad mentioning it. But that's the thing, I'm likely to talk about it. I'm in the community anyway. So I'm also a local I'm a parish councillor as well. You know, I'm a stakeholder. So it's a bit, you know, I think you have to think about valuing volunteers on multi-levels. Ultimately, the volunteering itself is what we feel a value, because we wouldn't do it. It's not our job. We're doing it because we love it.
That touches on a good point, and then I'll ask sort of 2 more questions before we can go. But if the kind of system of managing the community isn't working for the community, like, it doesn't sound like yours isn't working all out, but there's an element that isn't working in that situation, and that's the lack of kind of engagement with the management, perhaps. Like, what can organisations do to be open to change if someone's saying, okay, you've put out this suite of kind of tools and ways of managing us, but actually what I'd really like is an email once a week or something else?
Yeah, I think you value, you recognise the contribution, and you don't just compartmentalize and say it's in a box. It's volunteering is something separate and necessary. I think on the other side of it, the issues around scalability to managing groups of people is very, very difficult. I don't think volunteer managers don't not want to say thank you, and that the boss of this dementia home does appreciate me, but she just maybe didn't have the time to come over. And I think that's where technology can help. But it starts with planning and using the resource within your organisations. And I'm sure at that point there's a few groans when there's organisations listening who are going, we don't have any resource. We don't have a digital, we don't have a volunteering, we do everything. And but I think sometimes the only thing I can say, the consolation, is when you are a smaller organisation or volunteer-led organisation, you wear many hats, but you can really plan this stuff, and you can really sort of appreciate what it's like to be a volunteer. And I've seen small organisations being more effective with these ideas than larger organisations who can be quite unwieldy. I remember a very large organisation, it was Volunteer Week, and the digital department didn't want to do any, this is a heritage organisation, so I didn't want to do any tweets about Volunteering Week, because digital sat there and volunteering sat there. So, you know, so it's not, size doesn't really matter. The challenges faced by all volunteering programs are the same. Resource, I know big organisations that have a capacity and resource issues. Even the big organisations have those issues as well and challenges. But your audience will know more about that than me.
So we'll try and do 2 more questions before we have to end today. One that is saying that they have introduced a range of remote digital micro volunteering opportunities over the last year, all of which require induction and initial training, for example, on content creation, etc. Can you suggest any sort of volunteer opportunities that would not require induction or training?
Loads. I mean, Let's Do It Wales, have a look at their platform. Yeah, I mean, it just is, you know, it can be like doing things and sharing things on social media and tagging and sharing our event, or tell a friend about, or bring a friend and stuff. There's lots of challenge, you know, growing veg for a food bank. I know that's particularly a community type project, but if you're mixing the systems, if you're doing digital remote participation, but you're still saying you have to be inducted, you have to fill in an application form, you're putting barriers up to people that may not have the time to do that. When you've got roles that do need that, you're then targeting specific people whose expectations will be managed because they've been told up front, this is a role that we need to know more about you. We once had a role which was in a gallery invigilator. They had to have a credit check. Well, part of the opportunity information was you will need to have a credit check to get involved. But those who just want to do a little bit of micro volunteering and digital volunteering, remote participation, won't want to fill in a huge long application and be security checked. So you've got that one size fits all. Think about not necessarily making everyone go through the same hoops. And so many volunteer heritage organisations have agree on that, that mixing the two models can be challenging.
Right, I'll take what I will say is, so we've still got 17 open questions in the Q&A. It's been really lively, and we don't have time to look at all of them. I'd say that, well, this is going to disappoint some people because it's social media and not everybody uses it, so I apologise, but I will put them on the Heritage Alliance's Twitter to sort of prompt kind of community discussion. I will also put them in the Heritage Digital Facebook group to prompt discussion later on this afternoon. So if you're not in that, I hugely apologise, but I would love for people to go into these further. We will be sharing I know a couple of people have asked about sharing the recording and the presentation. We will be doing that. We asked for a couple of weeks grace, please, because we've got to get them captioned, get them edited. So they will be available. But I'll answer, or I'll ask, I won't answer, I will ask our last question. And it's more of a practical side of the volunteer management stuff, but I wondered if you could direct us to any practical resources that you've seen, for example, digital volunteer policies or role profiles in the course of what you do.
Yeah, I think like networks like what you I think there's so much out there. I think that talking to other organisations about their experiences. One of the things we've encouraged with volunteer makers and community makers is that the challenges that organisations are creating, we share them, and our best practice guides sometimes have been written by the organisations. So I think sharing your experiences, participants today are part of this. I get that, and that's why I love working with the heritage sector. Is so innovative, so creative, and always understanding it's about change. And the and the challenges are great, with COVID, and particularly traditional volunteers and those traditional age ranges are going to be quite nervous about coming out. What we found during the pandemic was that organisations switched to this really quickly because that was all they could do, was remote and digital participation. So I think looking at organisations, Suffolk Archives, Take Part Oldham, and Let's Do It Wales. There's universities like University of Cambridge, which I know a lot of their challenges and opportunities around physical volunteering, but they work with a younger audience. And just get in touch with me if you want more examples. But I think you agree, Carmen, there is a lot of resource out there in Google for networks like yours, and there's regional and there's national. So I think if you need to find out something, but ultimately nothing beats the real experience of organisations and their practical delivery and ideas, and learning from when it's been difficult and what hasn't worked, but learning from that and figuring it out.
I was going to say there's loads out there. It's one of the perennial problems of our sector that there's loads out there. You kind of want it in one place, and the best things I've found in terms of volunteering are NCVO. Their website is full of reusable templates, policies, stuff. The Heritage Volunteering Group have so much on theirs, and I'd really recommend. And they've obviously published this great new report that's hot off the press about volunteering. We have on Heritage Digital, we've published a couple of resources relating specifically to volunteering. So like they tend to be more around copyright and social media use, but check out our portal as well for a couple of resources that may be able to help. Right, I will end it there because we have gone over, but I will take those remaining questions and I will put them into the sort of the hive mind to see if anybody has any thoughts on them. But thank you so much, Claire, for your time today and for your great presentation that I think I can speak for everyone will inspire you to treat your community in a different way.
Thank you.
So my last kind of spiel of the morning is visit the Heritage Digital website. It's heritage-digital.org. We are funded by the National Lottery Heritage Fund and we have more to come. So please sign up to our mailing list if you aren't already and check out the kind of hub of resources we've created on the website. But finally, thank you all for coming this morning and see you all soon.